in caves. The Parisien reports about them being attached to one another in chains for 6 weeks, and they have a number of photos of the group of them. 4 journalists, obviously released on Sunday into the arms, as it is, the French president and to the foreign minister. And so the papers really talk about the conditions that they were living in for the 10 months, and I suppose you could summarize it as being pretty arduous indeed.
And what other information is coming out at this stage? Do we know if the French government paid a ransom or not?
Well, now there's not been a lot of information coming out on that front. The government, has to be said, has been tight-lipped about the whole thing. They say, quite glibly, we do whatever it takes to secure the freedom of French citizens. But of course, the papers are awash in speculation as to how, the hostages were finally liberated, whether there was a handover or whether they were rescued. It is reported that the French intelligence services were involved, but how, to what extent, for how long, not yet clear. And of course, as I say, there's been speculation as to whether there's been a ransom paid as well. And the French president continues to say, as previous governments have said, that the French governments do not pay ransoms. Now, there's speculation in Libération, in the Figaro. They're quoting people familiar with past cases as saying that, they could truthfully say that there is no ransom paid by the government to, for example, the kidnappers, but it could very well have been arranged through third parties. They could have had people in other countries, for example, neighboring Turkey, neighboring to Syria, where these 4 journalists were kidnapped and held. There could have been arrangements such that a third party exchanged money in exchange for the freedom of the captives. Now, we don't know any of this. This is speculation, but it's based on previous incidents where there's suspected to have been these kinds of arrangements to free the past captives.
OK, let's move on to some world news now and more revelations about the South Korean ferry, which sank, of course, last week.
Yes, now the South Korean press is really covered with the revelations that have been coming out of the transcripts now that we've seen, transcripts between the ferry and the maritime services. And we see for example, Chilsan Ilbo, a South Korean daily, it reports about the lengths of time it took for there to be any decision taken. 12 minutes, for example, for there to be any response to the distress call made by the ferry. It took a half an hour for there to be any kind of discussion about how an evacuation would take place, and another half hour before it was actually being undertaken. So an extraordinary length of time, according to the South Korean daily. And of course, they're calling the whole thing a complete shambles.
Vital lost time there. So we've reported there's dozens dead and hundreds missing, presumed dead. The captain has been arrested and charged. The Korean Times writes of the heroes and the villains, many villains in this story.
Yes, now the Korea Times decries really a lack of ethics, what they call a lack of conscience among the crew. It's a scathing editorial about what they call the extreme negligence and the ugly behavior, quote unquote, of the people involved, and that goes for the majority of the crew. There are reports of crew members just getting off the ship without evacuating the passengers. Inside information amongst engineers, really, where they were sending each other messages. They were talking to one another about, how to best get off the ship and abandoning ship without looking after the crew. But the Korea Times also says that there were heroes in all of this too, talking about a young woman crew member who is very much the exception, who gave up her life jacket so that passengers could be saved. A student who refused to leave the ship to save younger people. A teacher stayed on the ship to the cost of his own life. He sacrificed himself in order to help out a lot of his students who were on board. And so the Korea Times says there are a lot of exceptions to that, to the grisly side of the story.
Now, you're going to finish us off, Kyle. Back in France, a key anniversary here for French women, 70 years since they secured the vote.
Yes, indeed. Now, it will seem to some rather recent because France wasn't the first to get the vote for the French women. And, it was back in 1944 under Charles de Gaulle when he made the announcement a year later in the municipal elections, 1945. That was the first election that women were able to participate in. And it was much later than other Western countries. Canada, of course, 1918, the US in 1919, and the UK finally in 1928. So about 15, 16 years between the UK and then France.
Badly lagging behind there. Kyle Brown, thank you very much for that roundup of the papers. And now it's time for a roundup of all your sports news here on France 24.